Most people currently grind 80 hours a week, sacrificing their sleep, their health, and their youth, all to purchase a one-way ticket to a psychological morgue. You call it the American dream. You call it the finish line. You call it the golden years. I call it a planned suicide of the soul. We have been conditioned to believe that the ultimate prize for a lifetime of labor is a complete cessation of effort, but I am here to tell you that for the high achiever, for the person who has built their entire world around being someone of consequence, retirement isn't a vacation. It is a death sentence. I'm king, and I am a strategist for the human soul and a decoder of the hidden traps in our modern pursuit of success. I spend every waking hour obsessing over why the most successful people in the world are often the most miserable once they reach the summit. If you don't want to spend 40 years climbing a ladder only to find it's leaning against the wrong building, and if you want to ensure your later years are a rebirth rather than a slow rot, then you need to pay attention to every single second of this video. Subscribe and like right now, because the truth I am about to share is the only thing standing between you and a catastrophic identity collapse. We are diving deep into the dark side of the finish line, and we are starting right now. Let's look at the cold hard math of why your brain is trying to kill you the moment you stop working. There is a terrifying phenomenon known as the Shell Oil Study, and it should be required reading for every professional in America. For decades, researchers tracked thousands of employees who retired at age 55 versus those who retired at 65. The data didn't just suggest a trend, it revealed a massacre. Those who retired at 55 had a mortality rate nearly double that of those who kept working for another decade. Specifically, within the first 10 years of early retirement, the risk of death from all causes jumped by a staggering 89%. Now, the critics will tell you it's selection bias, that people retire early because they are already sick, but the researchers accounted for that. Even when you look at the perfectly healthy, the high performers, the CEOs with millions in the bank, the result remains the same. When you stop, you die. Why? Because the human brain is not a reservoir, it is a river. It requires flow to remain clear. The moment you dam that river with a permanent vacation, the water turns stagnant and disease sets in. Physiologically, your body operates on a protocol of efficiency. If a system isn't being used, the brain cuts the power to it. This is known as neuroplasticity in reverse. In your first year of passive retirement, your cognitive processing speed can drop by as much as 38%. Your memory begins to fray because the hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for forming new memories, thrives on challenge and novelty. Without a mission, without a problem to solve, your brain literally begins to prune its own synapses. It decides you are no longer a relevant biological entity. Then there is the cortisol factor. We think work stress is our enemy, but moderate controlled stress, what we call eustress, is actually what keeps your immune system vigilant. When you move from a high-stakes environment to a zero-stakes environment, your body's defense systems go into a state of sleep mode. Your inflammation markers skyrocket because your body no longer feels the need to stay battle-ready. You aren't just bored, you are biologically decomposing. Consider the 2000-hour vacuum. The average American professional spends about 2,000 hours a year at work. That isn't just time spent earning money, it is a massive scaffolding that holds up your daily existence. It dictates when you wake up, who you talk to, and what your brain focuses on. When you retire, you aren't just gaining free time, you are creating a 2,000-hour black hole in your calendar. Most people think they will fill it with golf, travel, or relaxation, but you cannot relax for 2,000 hours a year. Relaxation only has value in contrast to exertion. Without the exertion, relaxation is just waiting to die. Your brain, left without an external target, will eventually turn its analytical power inward. It will begin to obsess over small physical aches, past regrets, and the looming reality of mortality. This is the origin of the retirement depression that plagues the wealthiest neighborhoods in this country. You have the money, you have the house, you have the $1.4 million in the 401k, but you have lost your executive power. In the world of economic psychology, we see that wealth without agency is the fastest path to madness. You become a king without a kingdom, and there is nothing more pathetic or more dangerous than a man who has mastered the world but has no world left to lead. To understand how this feels in the real world, I want to tell you about Mark. Mark was the quintessential Manhattan success story. For 40 years, Mark didn't just work at his firm, he was the firm. He was the firm. He was a CEO who lived for the sound of his Oxford shoes clicking against the polished marble floors of his office on the 52nd floor. To Mark, the respect of his peers was the oxygen he breathed. The high-stakes negotiations, the emergency emails at 2 a.m., the feeling of being the only person in the room who could solve a problem that was his identity. He had a golden parachute waiting for him, a retirement package worth millions, and for years he told his wife, "Once I hit 65, we're done. We're going to the house in the Hamptons, and I'm never looking at a spreadsheet again." He thought he was escaping a prison. He didn't realize he was exiting the only theater where he knew his lines. Month 1 was a celebration. There was a gala, a gold watch, and speeches that made him feel like a god. He spent 30 days feeling like he was on top of the world. He played golf every morning, drank expensive scotch every evening, and woke up whenever he felt like it. He told himself he had finally arrived. But by month 2, the honeymoon phase began to evaporate. He found that golf was fun when it was a reward for a hard week, but when it was his only purpose, it became a chore. He started noticing that the other retired guys at the club spent 3 hours talking about their prostate exams and their lawn care. Mark felt a cold shiver of terror. He realized he had nothing in common with them except their age. He would check his phone out of habit, but the notifications had stopped. No one was calling him for advice, no one needed his approval. The world was moving on at 10,000 miles an hour, and he was standing still on a manicured lawn in Long Island. By month 3, Mark experienced what I call the silence of Manhattan. He would stand on the balcony of his penthouse, looking at the city lights, watching the throngs of people rushing to work, and he felt like a ghost. He was still physically present, but he was no longer a participant in the human story. This is when the identity death truly set in. He went back to his old office one afternoon just to say hello. He thought he would be greeted as a returning hero. Instead, he saw a 35-year-old sitting in his chair. The workflows had changed. The jargon had changed. His former colleagues were polite, but he could see it in their eyes they were busy and he was a distraction. He was a relic. He walked out of that building and realized that Mark the CEO was dead, and he had no idea who Mark the man was. The collapse was rapid. He stopped dressing up, he stopped shaving, he started forgetting where he put his keys, not because of Alzheimer's, but because his brain had stopped paying attention to a world it no longer found interesting. His wife said it best. "Mark, you're still sitting in that chair, but your soul stayed back in that office on the 52nd floor. He had the millions, but he was bankrupt. He had the time, but he was a prisoner of his own thoughts." This is the fate that awaits every person who defines themselves by their title rather than their talent. Mark's story isn't a tragedy of failure, it's a tragedy of successful retirement. It's the story of a man who won the race only to find out there was no prize at the finish line, only a void. So, how do you avoid becoming Mark? How do you build a life that doesn't crumble the moment you stop receiving a paycheck? The answer lies in a complete redefinition of what we call retirement. We need to move away from the toxic concept of stopping and toward the empowering concept of financial independence plus purpose. Financial independence, or FI, is about having the options. Retirement is about having no obligations. There is a world of difference between the two. The goal should never be to stop working. The goal should be to stop working for money you don't need so you can start working on problems that actually matter. The first tactic is building what I call the 5 pillars of psychological health. If you want to survive your later years, you must proactively construct these 5 things before you ever leave your primary career. Pillar 1, time structure. You must have a schedule. The brain craves rhythm. Even if you aren't going to an office, you need a mission start time every morning. Pillar 2, social interaction outside of your professional circle. Most professionals make the mistake of having 90% of their friends be coworkers or clients. When you retire, you lose your entire social ecosystem. You must build a community around hobbies, volunteering, or shared interests at least 5 years before you retire. Pillar 3, a shared goal. Humans are tribal animals. We need to be part of a team that is trying to achieve something. Join a board, start a nonprofit, or mentor a startup. You need to feel like you are contributing to something larger than your own comfort. Pillar 4, status. Don't lie to yourself, you need to feel respected. Find a niche where you can be an expert, whether it's becoming the best gardener in your county or a consultant for young entrepreneurs. You need a domain where your opinion carries weight. Pillar 5, activity. Physical and mental exertion. If you aren't breaking a sweat and you aren't struggling to learn something new, you are dying. The second tactic is the 5-year runway. You cannot jump out of a high-pressure career at 80 miles per hour and expect to land softly. You need to begin decoupling your ego from your job title years in advance. Start taking on projects that have nothing to do with your main source of income. Start identifying as a writer, a builder, or a teacher while you are still a manager. If your business card is the only thing that tells people who you are in a high-risk category for identity death. You need to practice being nobody before you actually become nobody in the eyes of the corporate world. The third tactic is the micro-mission strategy. Forget the idea of finding one grand purpose for the rest of your life. That's too much pressure. Instead, live your life in 3-month sprints. For the next 90 days, your mission is to learn conversational Spanish. For the 90 days after that, your mission is to build a piece of furniture from scratch. And for the 90 days after that, your mission is to help a local charity raise $50,000. These micro missions provide the dopamine hits that your brain used to get from closing deals or hitting quarterly targets. They keep the purpose circuit in your brain firing. Finally, you must adopt the 20% rule. Never allow your work intensity to drop to 0. Keep 20% of your peak career intensity alive indefinitely. If you were a lawyer, take 1 pro bono case a year. If you were a doctor, spend 1 day a month teaching. If you were a builder, keep a small workshop. That 20% is the anchor that keeps your ship from drifting into the fog of depression. It maintains your skills, it maintains your connections, and most importantly, it maintains your self-respect. In the Japanese culture, they have a concept called ikigai. The reason for being Interestingly, there is no word for retirement in the way we understand it in the Okinawan language. They simply don't have a concept for stopping. They have people in their 90s who are still active, still contributing, and still vital. They aren't working because they have to. They are working because they are alive. That is the mindset you must cultivate. Money buys you the freedom to choose your work, but it never gives you the permission to quit. Let this sink in. Don't be the person who dies at 60 and waits until 80 to be buried. The American retirement industry wants to sell you a dream of cruises and cocktails, but that dream is a sedative designed to keep you quiet while you fade away. Mark lost everything because he thought he was his title. He thought his value was tied to a corner office and a corporate jet. He was wrong. Your value is in your ability to impact the world, to solve problems, and to grow. If you take away the struggle, you take away the man. If you take away the mission, you take away the soul. The dirty secret of the financial world is that they focus entirely on the size of your nest egg and 0% on the quality of your nest. You can have all the money in the world, but if you wake up with nothing to do and no one who needs you, that money will feel like lead in your pockets. Wealth is a tool, not a destination. It is the fuel for your next act, not the curtain call for your last one. If you are watching this and you feel that twinge of fear, that realization that your job is your only identity, then this is your wake-up call. You are more than your salary, you are more than your rank, but you will only remain more if you have a reason to get out of bed tomorrow that has nothing to do with a paycheck. I want you to take a long, hard look at your life right now. If tomorrow your company vanished, your title was stripped away, and your professional network stopped answering your calls, who would be left? If the answer is nothing, then you are in the middle of a life-threatening crisis. You need to start building your second act today, not when you're 65. Comment the word purpose below if you are ready to commit to building a life that doesn't end when your career does. Like this video if it gave you the slap in the face you needed to stop coasting toward a psychological cliff. We are building a community of people who refuse to fade away. People who understand that the real work begins when the money is no longer the motive. I'm King, and I'll see you in the next reality check. Stay hungry, stay driven, and for God's sake, don't stop moving. The void is waiting, and the only way to beat it is to keep building. See you in the next one.